Welcome to this technology innovation series. In this session, I will be introducing Gartner's hype cycle for emerging technologies. This is a very interesting concept. This particular concept was introduced by Gartner. Gartner is a research and advisory firm in United States of America. What do they do is, they actually scroll through the entire technology landscape every year. They look into more than 2,000 emerging technologies and technological companies, and then they mark what are the important technologies that is coming every year and where do they stand in this particular graph. So this graph has got a shape like this, which means it has got a start point very near to the xy plane, and that is called the trigger of innovation. So always there will be a technological trigger, a new idea comes into effect, and slowly it is getting into the mind of people. And after that, the graph will actually go up and it reaches a peak point. So that is called the peak of inflated expectations. This happens with almost all technological innovations. In the beginning, there will be a small idea, and slowly people will start to catch the idea, and there will be a kind of expectation that is growing, a kind of anticipation. This technology is going to change the whole world or maybe an entire domain, and there will be something called hype. So that's what we call it as hype cycle. And once it reaches the hype, then there is a next phase in the development of the technology. It actually climbs down. It climbs down and reaches a bottom point. It's called the trough of disillusionment. This is also expected. At the peak of hype, everybody will be seeing only the positives about that particular technology, but slowly people will come to realize that there are so many negative elements, there are so many challenges, and the technology itself doesn't meet the expectations, and which causes a kind of disillusionment, and people will start losing interest in the technology. Maybe they will be talking negative about that particular technology. So that is called the trough of disillusionment. From that bottom point, there is another phase where the technology will actually climb a little bit high. So that is called the slope of enlightenment. First the hype, then the trough. Now people start to realize there is some kind of usefulness for this particular technology. An enlightenment that is coming into play. Something that has happened to Buddha. And slowly people start to realize that we can make use of this technology for so many good purposes. And so many people start to adopt it. And finally it reaches a steady phase. And that steady phase is the final, almost the final phase, that technology will be made useful to the entire humanity. This is a very interesting concept. And I was following this particular hype cycle over the past few years, maybe from 2010 onwards. And I could see the rise and fall of many technologies along this hype cycle, and it gives us a lot of insights. As a technologist, we have to look to the future. We should be able to see the future and adapt ourselves and to equip ourselves. In order to do that, we need to have an awareness. And Gartner's hype cycle is a perfect tool that gives us this kind of insights. For example, while I was doing my PhD, that was before 2010, I started with a high performance computing, HPC that is called, or in common man's language that is also called supercomputing. But later on, at the same time, there was something coming up in the backgrounds. Basically, HPC or supercomputing is distributed computing. Another form of distributed computing was emerging, and people used to call that particular technology as cloud computing. That was something like 2008-9, I came to know about cloud computing, and there was a great push, and there was a good hype about cloud computing. Basically, those years we had this great recession in the Western world, and the technological companies were looking for new opportunities. Money was not with the private companies, so they thought that they have to look to governments. And they introduced this concept of cloud computing to the government. They say that we can actually make use of cloud computing to ease or to solve the problems within the government. For example, storing the entire database of the population, the medical records, all those things. IBM as a private company, they push very high. As a result, there was a hype. There was a hype about cloud computing. By 2010-11, if you look into the hype cycle of that particular year, we could see that cloud computing was steadily rising on that particular graph, from the point of trigger to the point of peak. If I remember correctly, by 2011 or 12, cloud computing reached the peak of hype. And this is my experience too. Since I was following this graph, I thought that I have to change the pace of my PhD, or the mode of my PhD. I was able to convince my supervisor to do a small bit in my PhD, which could put the work which I have done onto cloud and get some results. Finally, when I finished off in 2013, that became an important part of my PhD, and that was very well received. This happened only because I was able to follow, or at least to predict, what are the things that are going to happen. In this example, with cloud computing. And if you look again into cloud computing, we can say that the cloud computing had this fall, the fall of expectations, the trough of disillusionment. By 2013-14, there were a lot of arguments against cloud computing. For example, security was a big concern, privacy was a big concern, and people started to debate against cloud computing. But then again, after that particular period, cloud computing had that enlightenment period. Slowly, steadily, cloud computing got into importance, and it became a part of day-to-day life. Nowadays, everyone uses email services, for example Google, or maybe Microsoft, Hotmail. We know that all these things are running on cloud. These are very small examples. There are much bigger examples are there. Now cloud has become a part and parcel of our day-to-day life. I would say that cloud has matured itself into a maturity phase as we see in the hype cycle. And this year I just looked at the hype cycle again, and I always look at the top of the hype cycle. Interestingly, it was machine learning, and that is the next big thing that is happening. So I will talk about those in the next session.